And it's my pleasure to welcome to the Today's Leader podcast, the podcast for the leaders and the entrepreneurs. Today, I have Nicole Jansen. How are you, Nicole?
I'm great, Tony. How are you?
I'm really good. It's been a really good day. I love, I've got no doubt you love what it is that you do, but I've spent the morning in leadership roundtables in an organization here, and you always feel so energized when you're working with people and helping them with their leadership. So I feel fantastic, and I know it's the end of the day for you, so I hope that you've had a fantastic day as well.
Oh, it's been has been fantastic. Actually, it's been kind of relaxing, which is unusual. Usually I've got lots of meetings, but it was more of a relaxing research-based day, so it's good.
Oh, excellent. Project day is what I call them. So tell our listeners a little bit about the Nicole Janson story.
Sure. Well, I started off in business very young. My parents were entrepreneurs, and my dad owned garage businesses, franchises, and my mom worked in those businesses. And then they started another business, and I started helping them with that particular business as well. And really just got knee deep into this idea of entrepreneurship and business very young. And then through that opportunity, actually had the opportunity to be able to learn a lot more about leadership and what works and what doesn't work when you're building teams, because they were building a very large team. And so there was all these different dynamics going on. And so just very young, I thought that was actually what I was going to do for the rest of my life, was to continue to build that business. And through a series of events, that business actually ended up falling apart. We built an 8-figure business by the early mid-90s, and I was in my mid-20s by that time. And, it was the very thing that I had started to learn. We realized that there was some problems, inherent problems in leadership and with who we were in business with. And so that business is no longer, but what I did is I took all of the learning from that and started to apply it in teaching other businesses and business owners and leaders and so forth how to avoid some of those pitfalls themselves.
It's you raise an interesting point, and one that is often neglected by business owners or leaders of that small to medium framework, is the importance of leadership and the development of the team. If we continue in organizations bringing in the wrong people, and I suppose in a large corporate, there are people that can hide within an organization that are the wrong fit. When it's a smaller or a medium-sized business, having the person that's a good fit and having those good team relationships, would you see that as being more critical for that style of business?
Absolutely, because like you just said, you can't hide. You can't just stay in your cubicle and do your thing. Everybody, especially even smaller businesses, like, if you've got a few hundred employees or even 100, you can kind of start to hide a little bit, But when you're talking about even smaller teams, startups, it is absolutely critical that everybody brings their best to the table. And it's also, and I look at even larger organizations that are more established, when you think of, I see leadership as not just at the top. I mean, we are all leaders, right? Yeah. We lead ourselves. The way that we operate, is an example of how we lead, even just on whatever the role is, interfacing with the customer, and you think about all of those little pieces add up to the organization as a whole. And so if you've got breaks in leadership and it's not being demonstrated, certainly from the top, then you're going to be more inclined to have those breaks in leadership. And I always say that, the bottleneck is always at the top. And so, if you have a bottleneck at the top, it's going to stifle what's happening below. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, in smaller organizations, everybody is jumping in, making things work. And we noticed, like, just having one or two people that started to go sideways could create a whole tidal wave through the rest of the organization.
And then I guess one of the other challenges that size organisation, or when you've got those one or two people starting to move away from being aligned, the concept of performance management is then part of the challenge, because a lot of small business owners, medium business owners, aren't necessarily skilled in those arts of conversations of how to arrest and drive performance. So I suppose that adds another area of complexity. And I guess when I talk to someone like yourself, you've specialised in, from what I can see based on the research that I've done, in the areas of team development and building productivity within teams. So what was the compelling reason, Nicole, that got you diving into that area?
Well, first of all, I believe that everybody has unique value and strengths to bring to the table. And a lot of times teams are underutilized. I mean, we know the statistics, right? You used to be like 65% hate their jobs. Now that statistic's somewhere up there, maybe 85% of people hate their jobs. And what a waste of human potential.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
so, you've got a leader that is heading up, or a leadership team that is heading up this vision and what they want to create, but they can't do it alone. If they could do it alone, then their vision's, of course, too small. So they need a team to be able to help them do that. But unfortunately, and to your point about performance management, unfortunately, a lot of times the leaders, they're visionaries, but they don't actually know how to lead or manage people very well.
Yeah.
And so there is this gap. And I mean, I've had leaders actually say to me, like, why do I need to acknowledge people? I mean, I'm paying them. And it's like, well, if you want their body to show up, you can pay them. But if you want their heart and their creativity, their innovation, and all of their strengths, then acknowledgement goes a long way, right? Giving them an opportunity to play to their strengths, where they're not just motivated by a paycheck, but they're actually motivated by growing, by learning. We know that from Daniel Pink's book, Drive, where he talks about those intrinsic motivators, which are actually more valuable than dollars, ultimately. Yep. Once you get to a certain point, obviously there needs to be a basis. They need to make money, obviously. But beyond that, it's more than that. People want to learn, and they want to grow, and they want to feel acknowledged. Are we not seeing that in social media right now? People want to be seen, they want to be known, they want to be heard. And when they're not, they start to get disgruntled, they start disengaging, or possibly even worse, being actively disengaged, maybe speaking out against, creating dissension within the organization. So you've got to address it, and you've got to know how to address it.
It's that concept of engagement is one that is compelling for me. I think there's been numerous research and surveys completed in the concepts of team engagement or staff engagement. And, most of them fall very, very clearly on what I would consider, I sort of look at it like a seesaw or a teeter-totter. You've got 20% that are actively disengaged. You've got, roughly the same that are actively engaged. And then you've got what I call the great unwashed in the middle of 60% that is like varying degrees of engagement. And, the challenge that you've got in any organization, no matter which side, is how do you continue to grow the active engagement and disavow in some way the active disengagement? Because that's the part that can be really cancerous for a business.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I think it starts off with, you start let's just back it up right to the beginning, is why are you in business in the first place? A lot of times there is a mission and a vision that leaders have, but that's not actually being communicated to their organization. Or it is, but it's like, this is my vision, you're going to do this. And versus enrolling them in that vision, not even just to the extent that they say, well, I bought into your vision and I would like to support you in your vision, but that it actually goes a step further, that they say, it's our vision. I'm part of this.
Yeah.
So that's where, to start off with your vision and your mission and your core values and why you're in business, to be able to make that clear, but then also then taking it to the next step and saying, how does it apply? So that's how your organization is going to benefit. How is each individual, how are they going to benefit? What's it going to mean to them? And then look at and saying, from a recruiting standpoint, and you say, okay, so if we're bringing somebody on the team, what are we bringing them on the team for? Are we checking the box and saying, okay, well, we need to, this role needs to be filled or whatever? It's not about that. It's you're actually buying people's strengths. You're buying their skills, you're buying their experience, you're buying all that. You're also buying their innate strengths. And if you can put people in a position that they are actually playing to their strengths, they're going to be more motivated. They're going to be more effective. They're going to be more creative. And they have this already, I'm sure, in the work that you've done, is that they have a higher ceiling of opportunity potential because you're putting them in a position to win versus actually just saying, this is what the role is. I need you to do this, but actually matching it. And, on my podcast, I have a lot of different leadership consultants that come on and talk about their different strategies. And it is so interesting. More and more, I'm hearing them actually say that they're talking about things like, having teams where they, rather than saying this is what the role is, that they're actually redefining and saying this is the ultimate outcome. Who is actually best fit to do that? And literally like sort of working in groups and having kind of a different leadership structure. And it's been fascinating to watch that as it starts to change. But it starts, it's with recruiting. It starts right from the beginning, and and then it filters out. It's not one of these check the box types of things, and that's what a lot of organizations are doing.
Yeah, but it's about that completion of something, isn't it? We tick the box, we say that we've done it, and then somewhere along the line we lose sight of what the outcome was actually meant to be in relation to it. And,
That's right.
Often when we can't measure something, people will shy away from it. And I find personally that with leadership development, some people, there are people out there that don't see the value in it because it's not part of that checklist. How can I ensure that this is actually increasing the outcomes that we're wanting as an organisation? That's a bit of a challenge. Interesting you talked about that team concept, because we actually saw that in play with one of our major retailers over here who prior to COVID really didn't have an online facility. And they're a dominant retailer, and fundamentally their call to action was always come into the store. And when and they've been working on the development of this online facility because their range is quite huge, in all honesty. And what they did was develop an interdisciplinary team where they got people together who may not have necessarily had the IT skills, the e-commerce skills that you would fundamentally get. But what they did was got a whole group of people from all different departments, put them all together, and they looked at the development of the online or the e-commerce facility in a completely different light, which then enabled them to jump through the barriers that potentially, by having skilled professionals in those areas saying, this is going to take us 9 months or 12 months or 18 months to do it properly, they were actually able to shorten down the time. And now they've got a fully functioning, and have been now for probably, I think, about 9 months, a fully functioning online offer, because they were able to get people who didn't necessarily understand the process but knew what they wanted as a customer, which was fascinating to actually witness. So tell me about, how do you work with clients? So your focus is around the development of the team and productive teams. So how do you talk me through how you would typically work with a client who's called you in, have identified we need a better team, they need to be more engaged, we need to get some productivity, because that's probably what you're hearing more so than we need leadership development. So how do you then work with them, what's the process that you follow, Nicole?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. Most of them will not be saying that we need leader development, and that is true, because a lot of times the leaders say, you know what, we're fine. We just need to fix. You just need to fix these people and get them.
Fix them.
Yeah, exactly. Have them get them to do what they're supposed to do, and everything will be fine. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. And of course, that's a really, for me, it's like, yeah, that's interesting, and that's an indication for me that that's probably where we need to start.
Yeah.
Is with the leadership. Because when I talk to a leader who really is self-aware and understands that they haven't arrived. I think of John Wooden, who even on his deathbed said, I'm still learning, I'm still growing, I'm still, looking to do my best. And you're either growing or dying. So the first thing is to get leaders to understand that they have an opportunity to grow, right? There's an opportunity for them, not just their team. So we start off there, and then we'll work downwards. So I'll work with the team, the leadership team, and say, okay, so before we go on rolling this out to your whole organization, let's talk about you. Let's talk about what are your strengths, who's on the team. It comes back to Jim Collins. You talked about get the right people on the bus and the right seats doing the right things. It's really asking that question is coming back to like, okay, why are we in business? But then once we've dealt with that, it's like, who's on the team? What's working and what's not working? So we start there. Then we look at it trickles down into working with the team. And I will use tools like DISC as a model of human behavior just to help them understand that there are different, and as simple as some of this stuff sounds, it really, it comes down to that. It's really understanding who's on your team and where are these, and where are they being utilized well, where are they not being utilized. So I use DISC, I'll use Strengths Finder, I'll use Colby Index to be able to really do some assessments to say who's on your team. Also looking at, and again, this is always in relationship to the outcome you mentioned about earlier. Sometimes they can forget the outcome, and you can do all of this wonderful team building, but if it's not designed for an outcome, it's just another check the box. That was fun, but we're not getting anywhere. And I'm a results-driven person, so I always am looking at, what are we doing this for? You want to go here, right? What's your strategy? Part of your strategy is figuring out who's on your team that's actually capable of having you get there. And you might, and what's interesting is a lot of times I use this one example. For example, I was working with this VP of sales, so it was a department, and he said, our team is just not selling. They're not getting the meetings to be able to do the sale. And I said, okay. And he's like, I don't know what's wrong with them. Do we need some retraining and all around sales techniques? And I said, it's not really sales techniques. Let's stop. First of all, before we go there, let's stop and ask who's on your team. And so as we actually mapped out who was on his team, it became very evident what the problem was. It's because they were operating they all had a certain personality, a certain way of doing things, and they were actually trying to sell to a different personality type. They were trying to sell to CFOs, and salespeople trying to sell to CFOs. You got two different personalities, right?
I can imagine, yeah.
And so I said, so rather than saying, okay, here's how you handle objections and run, and do all of that, why don't we step back and actually see, because business is all about people, let's understand who's actually doing the communicating. And how are you communicating? So a lot of it comes down to that level of understanding, and then building custom training programs around what's actually showing up from the assessments that we're doing.
I find DISC fascinating. And when I use it with clients, they just embrace it wholeheartedly. And so many misconceptions around personality profiling and putting people in boxes and what have you. But I just find that if you approach it in the right way and use it as a tool, as well as what we've got within us with our gut intuition anyway, it really does help people work better and more productive with people. So instead of people not understanding or misperceiving and all of this stuff that then leads to conflict within workplaces, if they've got an understanding around a person's personality style, all of a sudden we just start seeing a better workplace, don't we? We just start seeing a workplace that, what's the word, that gets each other, and I think that's a real positive. So Nicole, describe to me what a good workplace should look and feel like. What are some of those things that you would sense or see within a workplace when you know it's being productive?
Well, it comes back to when you were talking about engagement, and there's this 80-20 rule that's kind of a given, right? 80% of the people are going to, the 20% are doing 80% of the work, the 80% are the ones who are kind of holding the whole thing back. Well, what if we actually could increase that? What if we could get everyone on board? Look, I've had companies that I've worked with where they've had people in roles that it hasn't been the right fit. Not only just the personality, it's a culture fit, right? For what needs to happen. And so rather than leaving that person in that position, what we did is we actually moved them out into a different position so that they could be more successful and confident and so forth. So when you say describe it, imagine walking in and you've got this buzz. And I'm sure been in organizations like that. Like there's a buzz. People are excited to go to work. When you walk around, you can ask them and say, and I come back to the mission, you ask them and say, like, what are you here for? What's your role? And rather than saying, well, I'm HR, they'll describe it in a way that is related to the mission. This is what we are doing here. So there is an involvement. There is an ownership. So what I'll see ownership. You'll see naturally engagement. You'll see synergy. You'll see people respecting and valuing each other. You'll see leaders where the leader, because talk about DISC, there is a different way that like leaders who are D personalities and leaders that are C or S or I personality types will lead differently. They'll have different expectations from their people. And so what you'll see people that will feel confident. They'll feel validated by their leaders because their leaders and managers, that's including managers, will be managing them based on who they are, not based on who the person is, not based on who I am. Let's say I try to manage, I've got 10 people and I'm managing all of them the same way, but they're not all the same personality type, right? So then you get all these problems, and that's where all this disengagement partially stems from. So what you'll see that leaders are respecting their people. They know their people by name, right? They walk around, hey, how are you? Tony, it's great to see you. How's whatever your wife's name or whatever. How's she doing? Oh, I heard about so and so. Yeah, great job on that. You'll hear a lot of affirmation. Will there be productivity? Absolutely. High performance, high productivity. There'll be a standard. One of the things that I learned from one of my mentors, Blair Singer, is something called a code of honor. It's those rules of engagement. And so you'll see that the team will be operating from a common set of rules of engagement, where it's not just the core values. So a core value, you can have a core value to say, we respect is one of our core values. Yeah. Okay, well, you're in Australia, I'm in the US. Might be fairly similar, but now if I'm talking to somebody in Asia, right, or somebody that's from a different culture that lives here and is now working here, there's going to be a different understanding of what respect means. Even generationally, there's a difference, right? Yeah. So when you look at those core values of, let's say, respect or integrity or innovation, leadership even, people have these different understandings of it. So what you need to do is take that core value and then explain, what does that actually mean? Yeah. How do you describe that? Like in terms of let's say, for example, respect. how do we operate? Responsibility is another one, right? So what does it mean to take responsibility? Is it's just my job. I just do my job. That's not my not my job. How many times we hear that, right? So when you talk about taking responsibility, it's having everybody operating from the same understanding and how that's actually lived out. That's very important for a team to be successful.
I think that code of honor, or the definition of the values, is just so critical. And you pinpointed respect, and just from my experience within my teams, we always had a set of values, and respect was, and I would always go out of my way, as would my leadership team, to make sure that we defined what the behavioural standards are in relation to that particular value. And respect was always a good one, because within my team I would have a range of, kids fresh out of school, all the way through to the grizzly old tradie who spent his lifetime fixing roofs and now is spending his last couple of years before retirement in selling product. So big teams, and you talk to the grizzly old tradie about respect, and no doubt they would say people have to earn my respect. You talk to then you talk to them about, well, how does that young fellow who's just coming fresh from school, how does he feel walking into a workplace where people are saying, you've got to earn my respect, sonny? And that's not the value you want. You want a value where people are openly giving respect. And when the funny thing happens in that sort of, the code of honor, I guess, is that when you give respect, all of a sudden everyone's being respected. And isn't that just amazing? I love that. So,
and respected for who they are. And then it gets down to things like, let's say another one, never abandon a teammate in need. Now you can say, that support, right? Teamwork is one of our core values, teamwork. But what does that actually mean? So never abandon a teammate in need means that if you're, at 5 o'clock, everybody's usually going home, and you happen to see someone who is having to work late, what do? Do you check in with them? Do you say, hey, maybe somebody that's working next to you, it's like, hey, so good luck to you. Looks like you got a big workload. Do you go get them a coffee? Do you ask if there's something that you can do to help?
Yeah.
What happens if somebody falls behind on a project? Is it like, well, you know what, not my job? Or do you jump in and say, hey, what can I do to help? And there's a reciprocation that will happen, but you don't do it for the reciprocation ultimately. But when you start to create that mutual respect and value, and it literally, to me, that's teamwork. Together, everyone achieves more. And so again, it comes back to the mission. If the outcome is we're all on the same team or on the same page creating an outcome, then I'm going to be much more invested in helping my colleague when he needs it. And he might be more vested in helping me because we know what we're doing. Our goal is not to get a paycheck then. Our goal is actually to create an outcome.
Yeah.
And so it's down to specifically what does it actually mean. And it brings up another point of mission, is that one of the things that happened in our business, and it was in the direct sales business. So we had probably about 10 to 15,000 people as part of our actively operating in our organization, so forth, at different levels, and 11 countries and so forth. And in that scenario, we had everybody had a common mission, right? But what happened when I talk about the demise of it, what happened is that some people's mission was making money. Some people's mission was gaining all the credit, right? Some people's mission was that it's about me. It's about my self-interest. It's the greed and the corruption that we see in business. And so what happens when you get out of alignment in that is that things start to fall apart. And so one of the things that again, I reference Blair where I originally learned it. And this is what I've taught business owners, going in and saying, look, make it part of your code of honor: mission first, team second, individual third, and be very clear on what that mission is. Because when he was describing that many years ago when I was working with him, he was describing it, and I thought, my goodness, that's exactly what happened in our business. An individual, how often do we see that in business? An individual put their priorities, their self-interest, or a leadership team put their self-interests, in first place.
Yep.
And then the team, might be served-ish, maybe, right?
Yep.
And the mission falls by the wayside. This is where people get frustrated, especially young people. They get tired of seeing, so-and-so's, they're all getting all these bonuses, but we didn't get a raise, because times are tough, but they got bonuses. Why is that? Right? Because they flipped this around. But if you flip it where you have the mission first, team second, individual third, you will see a different style of leadership. And you'll see leadership actually start to permeate through the whole organization, if that makes sense.
It certainly does, and it's something that I've seen quite often in my experiences, where the leader puts themselves over and above everything else that's going on. And I guess part of my thought process as you were talking through that then, Nicole, was the correction that would be needed from the leaders at the top if they saw or perceived that actual was then happening within the organisation, that people were losing sight of the mission, losing sight of the team, and focusing inward on themselves. So, which then is, I guess, another challenge altogether if that wasn't being looked after. But that was a really clear point. So I appreciate you bringing that into the conversation. So who's inspired you, Nicole, in your leadership journey?
So there's been a few. I think of I've got the business leaders like the Steve Jobs and the Richard Branson, very different styles, but those individuals. I see Oprah and the way that she's operated. I'll also look at like the Gandhis, the Martin Luther Kings. I also look at the John Woodens, and the way that they led. I think of John Wooden. I actually had somebody on my podcast recently who worked directly with him and is continuing on his legacy and talking about the pyramid of success that he taught. And these are fundamental principles that he taught. And what was really fascinating about him is that he never used the word win. He never once. He of course, everybody knows who knows him knows that he's a legendary, basketball coach with so many championships. Yeah. But he never actually talked to his team about winning.
Wow.
He talked about them being the very best that they could be, and in each of these disciplines, if you will, right? So he would teach principles, lots and lots of principles, in terms of what it meant to be the very best you, to just show up. And he knew that if he could bring the best of people to the table, right, to the court, literally, and they learned to work together, and they learned to not have it be about themselves. You also notice that a lot of these great sports coaches, what they will do is their teams, it's not about one showboating over another. Right? It's about a team win. Yeah, there might be somebody who's a star, but when that star starts to set themselves up as as all of that and more, you'll see the coaches that will actually say, no, that's not how it works, and may need to actually bring them back, bring that humility back in, to help them understand. I think it was it Ziegler that said, individuals score points, teams win championships. Yeah. And there's a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. When we travel through life and we travel through business and leadership, there's going to be those times where we have those inevitable troughs, or we look at something like failure. How do you respond when you feel that that you failed at something, or that you're in one of those down moments? What are some of the strategies that you use that pull yourself back up and to work through that?
So I would say that building a successful 8-figure business in 11 countries and having it fall apart and having nothing, losing it all,
Yeah.
I would say that was a failure.
Yeah.
It was definitely a learning experience. And so what I did in that moment, I mean, I would not be honest if I didn't say that I first had a little bit of a pity party, and was like, why me?
Absolutely.
Why did this happen? So let's just be honest. That was the first step. But then after that, I looked at it and said, okay, what am I going to do about this now? It's this so what, now what? Okay, so this has happened. Now what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
And then I started to look at what I learned from it. And, I was partners with my parents. My parents have both passed away now. But when they were alive, we would have conversations about this. And my mom actually said something to me, which was really interesting. She said, and family business, by the way, that's a whole podcast in itself, the family dynamics.
Absolutely.
Okay. Really interesting.
Yeah.
But my brother worked with my father in his garage businesses and franchises over there too. So yeah, I have lots of good family business stories. But she said to me something which was really interesting. She said, you gained a lot more out of the experience that we did.
Okay.
Because I self-reflected.
Yeah.
And because I self-reflected, and because I really reflected on what did I learn, what worked, what didn't work about this, what can I use to move forward, I extracted, I squeezed everything I possibly could out of it so that I could apply it going forward. And I learned to do that in different situations. So that's business that we're talking about, but also in relationships and in other areas where I experience failure and struggle. Is the first thing is to acknowledge what is.
Yeah.
And then look at it and say, okay, so now what are we going to do about this? And learn all you can so that you can move forward. The other thing is that to not make it pervasive, like where a lot of times people will do that and they'll say, this always happens to me, or my life is over. I'll never be able to recover from this. And when you do that, then you're literally, and we can talk about mindset and all that, and the words, the power of our words. What happens is that you shut down any possibility of moving forward because you've decided, you're basically telling yourself that there's no chance. And, or at least at the minimum, reducing your potential for learning and growth. And so, what we tend to do is we tend to globalize the negative and we minimize the positive. And you've actually got to flip those around so that you start looking and saying, this is not a statement of my life. I'm not a failure. I am, right? It's not, I'm a failure.
Yeah.
It is, okay, this happened. So not to disassociate and don't take responsibility, but you actually see it for what it is, which is a life experience that you talked about earlier. It's a life experience. Okay, this thing happened. Got it. So what did I learn? What happened? What did I learn through that?
Yeah.
And I can move forward because you know what? I've got all this learning now that I'm actually even more equipped, not less, but actually more equipped to be able to succeed going forward. I don't know a successful person, a truly successful business leader, and I've met a lot of them. I've met billionaires. I've never met one that didn't have a failure or two or three. Yeah. And but it's not so much that they had, whether they did or didn't, it's really what they learned along the way. Yeah. And so it's just having some perspective, starting to gain some perspective on the whole situation and not to attach their identity to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting that, and great advice there. And interesting, in one of our previous episodes, we had a gentleman called Max Story from the States, and he talked about failure in a really simple light. And I still recall him saying, it's when we see a baby who's starting to learn to walk, no one sits there and points the finger and says, look at that baby failing to walk. Of course not. We're saying, look at them learning to walk. And so he always likes to think of that learning process as, the failure process as a learning process. So I'm just learning how to do this, and I'm learning how to do it better. And I certainly can take that on board at the moment, because 2 weekends ago, my wife and I ran the Australian Outback Marathon out near Uluru or Ayers Rock, as it might be known in the States. And my wife completed it, and I was scratching at about the 28.64 mark. And, considerably, we'd invested training and everything to get there, and I felt really, really flat. But ultimately, all I could do is, I could choose my attitude. So if I was going to be the negative one because I didn't happen to complete the full marathon, I would be remembered for that, or I could be the one that cheered and supported and encouraged people to come home, which is certainly the role that I took. But then it was about the learnings of what was in it for me. What wasn't I prepared for? What can I be better prepared for? So failing is very, very, very current in my mind at the moment, unfortunately. So Nicole, tell me about some of the traits that you've seen in great leaders in the past, and then are they the same traits that we should be looking for in today's leaders?
Yeah, great question. Leadership really hasn't changed. There's a saying, principles never change, methods do. And so when we look at leadership hasn't necessarily changed. In fact, I think we need to go back and revisit some of these older stories in history to see how leaders operated. And then the methods are going to change. Certainly the technology has changed, the pace of business has changed, and all of that. But when you think about, vision, integrity, which I think those are really, really important, taking responsibility, having empathy, being a just leader, somebody that is an advocate, not just simply for, the few, right, elite few, but actually being fair and equitable for all people, right? And not just even not doing no harm, right? Is actually, how do we do good? I think we have a lot of people right now who are saying, well, I'm not doing any harm, but they aren't necessarily contributing. And I've challenged myself with that and saying, like, how am I actually being a leader where I'm actually contributing to the good?
Yeah.
Right? You're either growing or dying. You're either, moving forward or moving back. There's no staying still. There's no holding court. It doesn't work because everything is moving around you. Right? So generosity is another thing that I think is really important as a leader, and it goes along with justice and some of the other things, is being generous. Being generous with your acknowledgement. We talked a little bit about that. And I find a lot of times leaders are like, okay, that's nice. Give me the real meat and nitty gritty of it. And it's like, well, you know what? That is it. Yeah. Because these fundamental principles drive all the rest of the paper. We can talk strategy and tactics all day long, but unless there are these certain things are in place, none of that's going to matter, right?
Yeah. I remember John Maxwell once said to us, I'm a John Maxwell coach, and being there at certification, and John always quite openly talks about his interactions with people, and he got asked a very similar question once. He said, come on, just tell me the most important thing about leadership. And it still sort of sits there that John says, well, the most important thing about leadership is that there's always more than one important thing. So there's always, there's not just one thing. It's a complex range. And that's why I find it flabbergasting sometimes that so many people discount the role of leaders within business performance. So Nicole, what's the vision for you going forward?
So my vision is actually to create a better world for everyone. And the business world is the area that I specialize in for the most part. But that plays into, even I'm getting into more and more talking with nonprofit leaders and helping them to understand leadership. And even leadership, I didn't use that term for the longest time. I would talk about components of it and demonstrate it and so forth. But I'm starting to talk more and more about leadership because it is that important. And success rises and falls on leadership. And we are right now at a point where there is a lack, I believe, of good leaders. And there's a lot of people that are very capable that are not stepping up for various reasons. And so my vision is to start to inspire great leadership and to inspire even those that may not see themselves as a leader to start to step up. You know, they see that they're the leader. I'm not the leader. It's they're running the company, right? They're running the show. They're the one in office. Yeah. And when in fact, actually leadership is very much a grassroots initiative. And that's where it starts, is right at the grassroots. And so, so that's my vision: is how do we inspire people to step up and make a great difference in whatever the area. I mean, there's 7 areas of influence, primary areas of influence in society, but we need great leaders in every single one of those mountains, if you will.
And support that vision wholeheartedly. So, Nicole, out of everything that you've accomplished over the last couple of years, what are you most proud of?
You know, it's funny, you asked me about the adversity and the failures. I think I'm most proud of the recovering from adversity. Had a lot of personal adversity over the last number of years, losing both my parents, getting divorced, not my choice, but but just respecting his, and going through that whole season has I've felt good about what I learned out of it and the person that I was able to become as a process of learning through and going through that. It's given me a greater sense of compassion and empathy for others, and it's made me a better coach and a better leader.
Excellent. So is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have asked you, Nicole?
You know what? There's lots that we can cover. I don't know. I think you're a great host, and I don't think there's anything that, I think we covered a lot of it today. Yeah. It's
like you said.
Tough question there, Tony.
That family business is a podcast on itself. Team leadership is a podcast. I mean, I could talk and listen to leaders, good leadership coaches every day. And that's one of the things I love, and I'm sure you do, about your podcast as well, because just that ability to connect with people and tune in to what it is that they're saying. I sort of see it as my own self-development process during the course of a month, talking to people like yourself. So I absolutely love it. So thank you. So finally, how can people connect with you, Nicole?
Sure. You can go to leadersoftransformation.com. That's the podcast, because I also have a podcast, but it also there's a coaching page, and they can learn more about the type of coaching that I provide and connect with me there.
Excellent. So, and we will put that in the show notes. Absolutely. Nicole, it's been an absolute joy having you on the Today's Leader podcast. Thank you so much for investing your time today for the leaders of today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, Tony.